become very experts at giving excuses. Doesn't it start at childhood and then extends all the way into adult? You know, and it used to be when teachers had to deal with students' excuses, it was, well, the dog ate it. Well, now I guess I understand from reading and listening to teachers, it's a little more sophisticated than that. The printer broke, the internet was down, because it's more high-tech excuses. But there were some that were written in, and teachers actually collected them, and these are word for word what the students wrote. My mom did it wrong, so I threw it out the window. Okay, well, maybe you should try doing it yourself, okay? How about this one? Dear school, please John being absent. This is word for word on January 28th, 29th, 30th, 31st, 32nd, and also the 33rd. Someone else needs to be in school, don't they? Please excuse Jennifer for missing school yesterday. We forgot to get the Sunday paper off the porch, and when we found it on Monday, we thought it was Sunday. That's clever. All right, they must have slept in, right? My son is under a doctor's care and should not take PE today. Please execute him. Now, I know some teachers might feel like that, but, you know, it was a misspelling there. I think it's excuse him, okay? And then one more. My dad forgot to do it for me. That's similar, but the last one. Please excuse Jimmy for being. It was his father's fault. All right. They need to get to some counseling, I think. But no, we're all have problems getting excuses because we're looking for a way out or to excuse our behavior. And perhaps the chief of all people that is known in the Old Testament for giving excuses is Moses. But that's really kind of contrary to the way we vision him because, you know, he's this Charlton Heston type of guy in the Ten Commandments, and he's good looking and he's bold and he's just the kind of man you want to be. But yet he wasn't always that way. In fact, everything he did in delivering Israel almost did not happen. But when we look back at the life of Moses, we learn some things that he was survived because his mother put him in a basket, and he ended up living in the Pharaoh's actual courts and for the Pharaoh. And in Acts, Stephen says he was educated in all the learnings of the Egyptians, and he was a man of power in words and deeds. He was quite a fellow, but it didn't start that way. Yes, he was called the meekest man in the world, but yet he had challenges. You know, we see him as a man that, you know, says, watch the power of God and dividing the sea. But he was the one that when God called him, didn't want to go. And it all started when he defended his brother when he was age 40. And he supposed, Stephen says in the book of Acts, that his Hebrew brother would think that God was delivering him through Moses. So he killed the Egyptian that was oppressing him, and the next day he found two Hebrew brothers fighting, and he says, why are you injuring one another? You're brothers. And he said, are you going to judge us and kill us like you killed that Egyptian? And he realized the word's out. And so this man who was a man of power and words and great deeds, he flees. He flees after killing this person, and he flees all the way to Midian in the desert. And you look at the photos there, this is not a pleasant place. And there he becomes nothing but a sheep herder, a goat herder. And he lives the next 40 years of his life. It's almost like in retirement. He's running from Pharaoh and for his life, but he's out there and he marries, he has 2 children. And I guess all is well because this is about as good as it's going to get. And that's when God interrupts this tranquil pastoral life in the desert. When Moses, when he's tending to the flock, sees this amazing sight that was read for us at the beginning of our service. A bush that's burning. But as long as he looks at it, the bush doesn't burn up. Well, like anyone else would do, he approached that burning bush, and that's where he heard the voice of God. Moses, Moses. Now, we know how he responded. When someone calls your name and you know it's someone in greater authority than you, he goes, here I am. In other words, I'm at your beckon. Here I am. And that's where God explains to him that I've heard the cry of the children of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. I see the bondage they're in, and I remembered God, my promise to Abraham that I would make them a great nation and bring them back to the land of Canaan. So he says, Moses, I'm sending you to the Pharaoh. I want you to go back to Egypt, and I want you to tell that Pharaoh that God says, let my people go. And this is where Moses' life radically changes, but it's not without some resistance. You see, it seems like most of the people that did remarkable things in the Old Testament were people that initially resisted. They didn't want to. Think of Jonah. Go that way, he went that way. And we think Moses here in this case, God says, go to Egypt. He says, no, I ran for my life. I embarrassed myself. They're not going to believe me. I tried that once to be a deliverer. Didn't work out. Just let me tend to the sheep. But God is going to deal with his excuses. Because even though God said go, and Moses initially says no, God's going to answer all his reasons not to. And in there, we're going to learn some similarity to our own lives. And maybe perhaps you'll find one or two reasons that you have used or that you hold dear to your heart that allows you to be excused from going across the street or standing in front, talking to your neighbor, or doing what God has asked us to do. And so let's look at what we call the 5 excuses of Moses. Now, they're not all really excuses as we look at them, but when we see them, we're going to see that they're used to keep him from going to the Egypt altogether. Now, the first one we find in chapter 3, and it'd be great if you read along and follow this in your Bible. And the first thing he says in verse 11, but Moses said to God, who am I? Now, I just stop there because that's really the question. Who am I? That I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt. And so it's an excuse, but it's offered in a form of a question. And there's various forms on that, like, whoa, you've got the wrong guy. I'm not capable, and I'm not have the ability to do that. I've tried that once and I failed. They're not going to listen to me. Send someone else. And so basically you could say, I'm a nobody. I'm a goat herder out here in the wilderness. You know, who am I to go back to the kings of Egypt and tell them, you let my people go? No doubt, being raised in Pharaoh's court, has he seen princes and kings from other country come and talk to the pharaohs and make treaties and bring them gifts? And he's probably seen what they've done, and he realized, I can't do that. And so he feels like, I'm just inadequate. Who am I? Now, honestly, first of all, isn't that a fair question? It's really a fair question because he's asking him to do an amazing event, to go to the king of the most powerful country in the world, or one of them at that time, and demand that all these Israelites, millions of them, that you just let them go. Like, really? You want me to? Who am I? And actually, there's a degree of humility in that because really, this is way above my pay grade. You expect me to do that? But God answers his objection. He answers and he just simply says, I'll be with you. Now notice how he reads. He says, certainly, verse 12, I will be with you. And this shall be the sign to you that I who have sent you. When you brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain. I'll bring you back. You know, folks, to end the discussion right there. About you. Yeah, I get it. You're a nobody. I get it. You're woefully inadequate for this task. But it's not about you. It's about me. I'll be with you. I'm the one that's going to work through you. I'm the one that's going to accomplish. I just need you to go speak for me. Now, if we fully grasp that it's really about God and not about me, like, okay, I'll go. But yet we just still tend to resist and push, like, well, how do I know you're with me? And how do I know you're going to help me? You know, I'm still scared. So he continues on. But isn't that the answer? He says, I'm going to be with you. And when we come to the end of ourself, and that's sometimes broken, or we realize I have no more resources, and really it's not in me to go any farther, that's perhaps when you find the beginning of God working in your life. When you come to the end of yourself, that's when God can begin. You know, it's interesting, you look at this lady, Gladys Aylward, and she was a missionary to China. It's an interesting story. There was a movie made about her, and Grace Kelly starred in it. But she went to China, and this is in 1900. She died in 1970, and she had a heart for the orphans. And a quick story about her, that here's some of the actual orphans that she helped. The Japanese were attacking, and she had to lead hundreds of orphans to safety, and she got up against the Yellow River, and the ships to transport them, the ferries weren't there. They waited 3 days. And one of the girls said to the lady, you know, you are Moses. And she says, no, I'm no Moses. He says, well, don't you believe that Moses parted the sea and they crossed on dry land? She says, yeah, but I'm no Moses. And the little girl said, yeah, we know you're not Moses, but your God is the same God that helped Moses. God was with him, and God is with you. What great things can you do in your life for him if you just go and realize it's not about herself? She found courage, and she crossed and saved those kids at that time. And so we look at it. He goes on to say, well, okay, Lord, I'm going to go. But suppose I do. This is hypothetical. He's not giving in that he's going, but he says, suppose I do. And verse 13, behold, I'm going to the sons of Israel, and I'll say to them, the God of your fathers sent me to you, and now they may say to you, what is his name? What shall I say to them? So now it's an issue of really authority and like credibility, and he's asking, I'm going to go there and say, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob sent me, and they're going to say, yeah, what's his name? Who is this God that sent you? And basically Moses said, I don't know. What am I going to say? He doesn't know this God who promises to be with him, and that's perhaps why he's hesitant. Who is this great God, the I am? And so he says, what shall I say? And I know, and a lot of us, we feel woefully inadequate because we really aren't prepared. We don't have this knowledge of God or what he wants us to say, or we just don't know God himself. And so it's interesting. He comes back with just a simple response when he says, I don't know what to say. He says, here's what you tell them. You tell them, I am that I am has sent you. Now, that's one of the personal names of our God. In the Hebrew, it's roughly pronounced Yahweh. The American Standard calls it Jehovah, and that's where you get that word from, Yahweh. But translated, it just means, well, as we see it in the New American Standard, it just means I am. Not that I was, not that I will be, just I am. In the past, I am. Right now, I am. Future, I am. He's the eternal one. He lives above time, and we think he's pre-existent. No, that means he was. No, he is in the past. He is now. He lives above this physical world and temporal time. He's the one that can make things happen. And he says, you tell him the I am has sent you. You know, if we just get to know who God is, we're going to have a confidence that perhaps we never had because it's him that is going with us, and it doesn't rely on myself. That's been the scariest thing in my life. I was like, well, how am I going to do this? How am I going to address this person? What if I have objections and pushbacks? What if I don't know enough? And I'm fear of failure because remember, Moses already failed, didn't he? He's in Midian because he ran for his life. Now God wants to start all over again. Now the first time he's probably too early in the time frame. He thought, oh, they'll assume that God's delivering them through me. But he's pushing the time frame or the plan too fast. God wasn't ready to deliver him. But now 40 years later, Moses is uniquely qualified, isn't he? He didn't know that. He was raised in Pharaoh's court. He's brilliant as far as his education. He knows how to deal with kings. He's been in there. And then he knows the life of a shepherd. He has the compassion, the heart for people that he learned by being out in the wilderness and tending sheep. And the self-reflection and the spiritual growth that took place there. There's no one like Moses who is at age 80 now to go back. And God knows that. He says, stop looking yourself. It's the I am that's going with you. Well, Moses says, okay, let's talk about the next problem. So suppose I go, and suppose I get there and I tell him the I am has told you, has sent me. And he goes, well, what if they don't believe me? So now we're in chapter 4 in verse 1. So Moses said, what if I send them, let's get to this one, and they will not believe me or listen to what I say? For they may say, the Lord has not appeared to you. Now this is a legitimate questioning, again, of himself, but he's forgetting about who's going with him. He's thinking about himself, isn't he? What if they don't believe me? What shall I say to them? Who am I? It's all about self and not about the one going with him. So he's still in that thinking, that process. Now, I just want you to note this. God doesn't answer any of these excuses like, Moses, we need to build up your self-confidence. Well, we need to, yes, you can, rah, like a coach. You can do it, stick to it, just persevere, go out there, believe, and you can achieve. None of that. He never tries to build him up as though it's a lack of self-image and not having a good enough attitude. The real problem with Moses not wanting to go is he doesn't have the right attitude towards God, who's going with him. That's his answer every time. I'll be with you. Well, who shall I say? I am. He says, well, what if they don't believe me? And he says, that's the what if. What ifs will paralyze us. We can think of all these worst case scenarios, and they're all hypothetical. Well, what if? What if they stone me? What if they don't like me? What if they reject me? And they paralyze us because we create these fears that keep us from doing anything. That's what Moses is doing right now. And I understand it because we've all been there, haven't we? So God says, what's in your hand? Isn't that what he said? Well, what was in his hand? His staff. He says, throw it on the ground. He throws it on the ground, and what happens? Turns into this viper, this snake, and it says Moses fled from him. He's been in the wilderness, he knows long enough that that's something you don't stand around. It's going to kill you. Now, how many times has he dropped his staff before? Probably many times. Has it ever turned into a snake? No. Then God says, pick it up by its tail. Now, any one of us that know anything about snakes, where's the worst place to pick up a poisonous snake? Eastern Oregon, if you're going to pick up a rattler, do not pick it up by its tail. Its head will come around and strike you. If you can pin it and grab it right behind the neck, the head, you're okay. But he grabs it by the tail, and it comes straight like a staff again. He says, stick your hand into your side. Sticks it in, pull it out. Leprous. Put it back in, pull it out. Clean. He says, if they don't believe these two signs that I sent you, go get a cup of water out of the Nile, pour it out, and when it hits the ground, it's going to turn to blood. Is God answering his uncertainty and his what ifs? He says, Moses, it's not about you. It's about me, what I can do for you, and I will do for you. And so, let's be frank. If I had in my arsenal those type of signs, I've thought about this. Boy, I could do a lot more convincing people of the truth of Jesus Christ. Boy, if I could just do a miracle. Go into Starbucks and walk up to a guy. Here, let me see your latte. Blood, coffee, blood, coffee. Now believe in Jesus, right? Wouldn't you convert a lot of people if you could do that? But yet God has given us the signs that we need. John chapter 20 said, these signs have been written that people might believe. The evidences are there. The miracles have happened. But when that's all said and done, you know what you can do? Just simply share with them what God's done for you in your life. He says, I found that I can argue with people about the existence of God. I can argue about the evidences that Christ rose from the dead. I can argue about all those things, but when someone tells me about what their God is, Jesus has done for them in their life, I can't argue. Because how do I argue with their personal results and how their life has been changed? So it's just like, when we're talking, so I don't know. I'll just tell you what he's done for me. How he saved my marriage, he saved my life, rescued me from drugs, whatever it is. You can tell your story. And there's a miracle in all of us if we're just willing to go without any excuses. But Moses is not done because God's just taking care of each one, right? I'll be with you. It's the I am, the eternal one. I'll never let you down. I'll give you signs. But then he says, well, Lord, there's another problem. Now we're in verse 10. He says, please, Lord, I've never been eloquent. And so when we look at excuse number 4, he says, I neither recently nor in times past, nor since you have spoken to your servant, for I'm slow of speech and slow of tongue. Boy, this will get the rest of us. If the first 3 didn't get you, this is your excuse, all right? Because I know that a lot of us, we say, well, I'm not a public speaker. Well, he's asking Moses to be a public speaker, but he's not asking us, first of all, right? But I've never been good with words. I stammer, I stutter. Some have actually said Moses could have had a speech impediment. They'll go that far because when he says, I've never been eloquent or I'm slow of speech, he had some type of problem. He isn't just making this up. And so he says, you want me to go and to speak for the I am? And I can't. You got the wrong guy. Find someone else. I'm just not a talker. All right? I'll support, but don't ask me to say anything. Now, I've included pretty much everybody else here. All right? We're fearful. And so God comes back and says, who made your mouth? You did? He says, well, I'll be with your mouth. I'll teach you what to say, and I'll help you say it. Isn't that amazing? I mean, everything that Moses is throwing up to not go, God says, I'm going to empower you. Not only has he solved the problem, he's blessed him like, this sounds exciting. I get to go and do miracles. God's going to help me speak. And why wouldn't you want to go? And finally, we get really perhaps the real reason that he's offering all these excuses. And that's finally in the 5th excuse, where in verse 13 he says, Lord, please just send someone else. And maybe that's a combination of all the above. He's just not convinced that he can do it. Well, he already knows that. We already know that he's convinced he can't do it. But he's not convinced that God's going to help him overcome. Or else it could be he just doesn't want to go. And we might think it's the latter because in the next words it says, the Lord became angry with him. Angry why? Because he says, there's no reason for you to not go because everything you have floated as the why you shouldn't go, I've answered 100 times what I'm going to do for you to compensate for your lack of adequacy. There's no reason for you not to go. I've already dealt with it. Now it's this problem. You just don't want to go. So that's where his anger comes. He says, tell you what, I'll send Aaron, your brother. He'll speak for you. You tell him what to say, because I'll tell you what to say, and then he'll speak for you. Now just go. So when it's all said and done, we have 5 amazing excuses that that Moses uses to try to keep from obeying God. And in each one that God actually answers. And sometimes we're going to get pushed back in our own life from people that we talk to. But what we have to do is learn to remove ourselves from the issue, the whole situation. Because when we go and people don't want to listen, they don't want to believe us, they're not impressed with our speech, and they push back. Because you're going to get pushback, aren't you? People object. We have to understand their issue is not with you. Their issue is really with God. And if we remove ourselves from the situation and just let God speak and work through us, it's amazing what we can accomplish. And I hear stories from all of you already about, yeah, I invited someone and they came and you were shocked. I mean, that's the most shocking thing, because we got this idea that if you invite someone to come to worship, now no one wants to come. Then when you finally find the courage to ask someone, they come, you go, wow, they said yes. And then what's even more exciting, when people are more shocked, then I asked this person for a Bible class, and I go, you probably don't want a class, do you? Well, yes, I was waiting for someone to ask me. Then they're even more shocked. He said, that's all I have to do? Yes, sometimes that's all we have to do. Let God work through us, because we believe he puts us in contact with people that are wanting to hear the gospel. Now, when we look at these, they're so simple, aren't they? He says, send someone else. He said, I will send Aaron with you. And that's why we talked about last week, going in twos, partnering with people, because there's a lot more strength when going with someone else. And there's a lot of wisdom in that. But when it's all said and done, you look at Moses, and here are his excuses. And God gives an answer for everyone, doesn't he? Who am I? And I know some of us, we just feel woefully inadequate. And I get that. There's many times I do, especially depending on the situation, if it's something new that I haven't ever dealt with. But God's promise is, I'll be with you. Or as the Hebrew writer says, I'll never fail you, I'll never forsake you. God goes with those that are going for him. Then he said, well, what shall I say? He says, well, just come to know me, and you'll have so much to say that they can't keep your mouth quiet. Then what if they don't believe? Well, it's not about believing you. It's believing Jesus Christ and who he is. And God's going to work through us, and if we let our light shine, we're going to be a walking testimony just by our behavior. So that's how it starts. Well, I don't speak well. God will help us speak, because we understand, and I hope we all trust the powers in the word. It's not in us. In Hebrews chapter 4, we'll look at that tonight. The word is living and active. It does the work. It's not me. So if you stutter and stammer, and if all you can do is open the verse and point to it, you can go for God. Could a person that is mute, could he teach the gospel to someone without speaking a word? Yeah, just pointing. Now, that might be awkward, but you could get the job done, right? It's not about us. It's about what God can do through you. Send somebody else. Sadly, I think that's a lot of people's attitudes. I'll worship. I might even come to class. I'll give and I'll sing. But don't ask me to go. I don't know how to deal with that one, because that's between you and God. But I don't believe that's our hearts. I believe we want to. We just got to be equipped to. We got to be encouraged to. And we just got to trust that God is with us. It's not about me. It's all about him. So, if you're with us, no more excuses. And it's interesting, the things that Moses didn't offer when we go all the way back to the beginning. Because it says there was never a prophet like Moses. He was outstanding. And he was the meekest man in the world. But it almost never happened because of these excuses and his reluctance to go. He never threw up this, I'm too old. He's 80. Did he offer that as an excuse? No, he never offered that. He never said, well, who's going to tend the flock? My business and all my physical and financial concerns. He never threw that up. And so that's interesting. It was all about self. And God answers that. Let him work through you. If you're with us and you realize that I got to start following God so this can all start happening in my life. We're going to sing a simple song. It's I Surrender All, isn't it? And those words are accurate. It starts with I. It's very personal. I can't do it for you, and you can't do it for someone else. I have to surrender. Second of all, it's all encompassing, isn't it? I surrender. It's like I give up. I can't do this on my own. I've tried. It's not working. And Lord, I need you in my life. And I trust you and that you're going to bless me and take care of me, that you're going to be with me. And it's not partial. It's not like, well, I'll surrender part of my life. He says, we're going to sing, I surrender all. All my being, all my soul, all my strength, all my will. Because I trust that you can take better care of me than I can take care of myself. If that appeals to you, won't you come as we stand and sing?